Welcome to the Leadership Room, CFO's podcast, where we dive into exciting and important aspects of leadership. Today, we'll talk about how to navigate and lead in unsettled times, what leadership qualities are becoming more and more important in this new area we're witnessing. I'm Michael Tostrup, your host for today's podcast. I'm head of our leadership consulting here at CFO and have the pleasure of helping managers with strategy and transformation. Together with me today to talk about today's topic, I have Bernd Vogel. Bernd is a professor of leadership at Henley Business School. Besides being a professor, you're also the founding director of the Henley Center for Leadership. You work with global organizations on leadership, energy, and transformation, and you bring over 25 years of experience in both academia and executive education. So, Bernd, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
So this sunny afternoon here in Copenhagen with an important theme coming ahead of us. So let's get started. I know you are interested in energy in leadership and in organizations, but why is energy so important in today's organizations?
Well, that's a great start, and I always give two responses to that. Energy is actually not at all interesting. It's interesting what the energy is directed to, right? When I look at your, when I came in, it says Resultate, in half Danish, my half Danish. And it's, we know that energy or the shared engagement of people drive what organizations, whether public or private, want to achieve. It's like the fuel, that you have, which makes things move. And that's, particularly important when we have difficult times, but also huge opportunities.
Yes. Great. So I guess today we talk about whether it's the Trump area or we have here in the Joint Kingdom with Greenland and everything on the pressure, quite a lot of things going on. So for top managers, we need to somehow communicate about what's the situation and what kind of direction will we set. So in other words, is there something with the leadership qualities, capabilities that's needed today that has changed, or how would you see that?
Well, you go right in the interesting topics, right? World situation. No, I think there's always a mixture between things that we already know for a while and things that change and are unique. And I think that's actually a good situation for managers or leaders or executives because they can also build on some of their experience, some of the things they do. Just becoming difficult when they rely on that all the time and become complacent as organizations or individuals. So that's why we look for something else. I think for today, if we look at some of the things that organizations want to look like, I think as an organization, to respond to such complicated, complex problems, you want to think about leadership as a process, as many people involved. We often focus then on some individuals at the top, like we've done in the intro here. But aren't we actually stronger when we think about what is the executive team doing together, right? How do we approach it? How do we bring in middle managers? How do we bring first-line managers? And all of a sudden, we have a completely different position of strength. Because I think. And the second part then is, I think we also want to acknowledge that not everyone expects that the top has the answer, right? There's accountability, responsibility, but how do we find, time and sprints actually to find answers in that ambiguous situation? And by that, I think it's good to reach out, right? Still accountability is with these people, but let's kind of take a step back. And that's for me a starting point just to kick us off.
Yeah. So it sounds like instead of expecting the one big manager standing in front, making sure to fix things, it's more about a collective effort, seeing the whole management team coming together, but also understanding perhaps the limits they need to bring along the organization in order to drive and be successful in the environment we see.
Well, I think you have to acknowledge that this is as one case, and we see that in other ways. It's just extremely unpredictable, right? And if you step up and say, we know exactly what's happening, that undermines, in a way, your brand, your relationship with your colleagues. And so you want to acknowledge that this is difficult, We want to acknowledge that you have confidence in your business, but also that you actually might move around a bit in your decision making, because every morning at the moment you need to rethink, do we get our products and services into some areas? Do other products and services come to our area? Because, all of a sudden we become the really competitive place where people want to, sell stuff. And so, and treating your colleagues really as adults and saying, look, that is difficult. It's very fast moving. We need to get through these periods with good decision making, but it might also change because we are not completely in control. Is, I think, treating that with an open and strategic mind.
I guess that must put some pressure on the communication skills, standing in front of the employees, explaining that there's unpredictability. I might come up with a different answer next week, but still being able to be transparent about how do we see the situation, what kind of direction will we set, what kind of priorities will we make. And I've seen quite a bit of top managers, and I've served in my job as a consultant, and some of them are really brilliant in that. Making sure that people focus upon what can we do the next 2 weeks, things might change next month. But I've also seen some who are perhaps, introverted, analytical. They really know their business, but it's like they communicate like a bookkeeper of accounts. So is there something that's more needed here today, because it's a difficult communication task, I think.
I think it's difficult because also our audience is difficult, right? We often look at those who speak, and I would first look at who do we actually talk to. And so, people at work, managers, senior managers, they project so much into the executives, right? And half of them want an answer, obviously, simplify, and half of them know there is no answer, right? There's every 2 weeks, a step-by-step sprints, and then we see how this gets all calmer. And that's what you cater towards in a way. And it's a whole spectrum. And by that, I think you need to acknowledge that you basically capture both. Those who want, safety, and those who know that type of security, I know you can't provide that. Yeah. And that's where the messaging needs to be firm, but also open. And I think, to start with, I'm a bit more ruthless on the question whether you're the type of standing in front of an audience. Yes. I would say it's your job. Yeah. So pretty full stop. I might be an academic, but that's how I see it. You that's your life goal, right? Yes. To run an organization, and then you want to take your type and work yourself or with others to master these situations. And I think there's risk and strength on both sides. Again, you looked at two areas, right? The introvert. I think some like silent leadership. They react to that quite nicely, right? But also you need to reach out who maybe need a bit more. Maybe that's you or some others in your team. But and some like the visionary, mobilizing type, outgoing. Some don't want to work for such type of person, right? So because it might drain projects all the time and initiatives. So I think you want to balance that, and for you as a manager, you want to really step out and carefully think. And I think that's the main thing that I would recommend. Go prepared, be transparent, think what you're doing. You might get it completely right, but likely not, and you don't catch everyone. But that's kind of the first start. And what do you want to get out of this? And instead of, and look at your audiences there. And what's the aim for, particularly in crisis situation? Is it safety? Is it confidence? Is it transparency? That's where I would start, and then plan for the actual activity.
Yes, great. I think that's put some light on what's needed leadership-wise. So thank you so much for clarifying that. So one thing is talking about transparency. I think for some, in a practical sense, it can be difficult, right? Because how transparent should I be about the situation? How much, if I'm a little bit nervous myself, as you say, you sort of project things into what the CEO is talking about. So just a little word can mean a big thing in the organization. So have you ever any thoughts about that, about the level of transparency and how to handle this dilemma?
Yeah, I think that it is a real dilemma, exactly like you say, and because again, you seniors, middle managers, first line react differently. I always turn to a position of strength, thinking about these are strong characters and people. That's why we have them in our organization mostly. So, and I think more transparency. But if it's legally allowed, I mean, often there might be legal reasons when you do an M&A. There's rumors, you can't say things. So there's limits to that. But if you can, I think more transparency, because you take these people more seriously, because they are the ones that fulfill the journey, and either that's a really good journey or that's a very difficult journey, and so my recommendation, be transparent, because most of the time they know anyway what's going on, right? It's underestimating their strength. You have them in your business because you want them to be clever. They are your radar about the business, about what's going on, and then obviously you want to give them some confidence or safety and security. That comes, we call that, what are successes that we can build on, right? Can we refer to our strengths? Where do we see difference already? And so that you build confidence, while you're quite ambitious or transparent on the other side. And these are the two things that you want to bring together. What you don't want to do is that people go away and they think that you've underestimated their intelligence and the business acumen and understanding what's going on. And because that would, again, undermine your relationship. And next time you communicate, there's already question mark in the room.
Yes. Okay, so that's really specific advice. So thank you so much for that. So being transparent, you don't want people leaving the room thinking that we can't handle to see the things we can see already, and making sure that we can handle these things. It also seems like what you're saying is important to sort of both be, face the brutal fact, be transparent upon these things, but leave the organization going out the door with an idea that we can do this, like building on strength, success cases in the past, come on guys, I believe in this. So we just have the energy to go out in the world to do something about it. And that's a critical skill to make sure that happens.
Absolutely. We call this in our research and practice mobilizing strategies. Whether you face unsecure, difficult situation or really under threat, or you chase a great opportunity. Not every business is failing, that, and so, but then you come up with extreme interesting plans and you communicate that. You want to understand that first. You want to communicate that reaches everyone, right? And everyone understands that's relevant. Just knowing is not enough. It needs to be relevant to me. And can I do something about it, right? And then, because we're ambitious, either with regard to, oh dear, our business is not doing well, or we really have ambitious plans, you want to invest in that confidence, that shared confidence, that people go the journey with you. Because, again, they are doing the journey, right? And you are orchestrating what's happening.
Yes, great. So I think one of the things that might happen these days or months is that we have made a strategy, say, a year ago, half a year ago, 2 years ago. Things have changed in the surroundings, times to update plans, etc. One thing is updating the piece of paper and the plan, and even having the board of directors saying yes to this. A different thing is to make sure that you, as you say, mobilize the organization to carry them along with you. So I'm interested in this thing about being, agile, flexible on one side versus on the other side, staying on a certain path and direction. Because I guess there's also a limit to how much you can change. So it's not too much of a zigzag way of doing things. Or how do you think about that?
Yeah, I think first it's always good to go from a plan to real action, right? To embedding things. I think that's the key idea. And then we have this phenomenon between the stability and what needs to be flexible. And we tend to look at often to say everything needs to be flexible all the time. And I think you want some stability, right? You've made up your mind, right? So how much have you thought about your next strategic move, half a year, 2 years? And how much have you anticipated, right? Done your radar, around what's happening, your scenarios. And so you want some likelihood around this. So and then obviously at the current, it seems that there's one global event after the other that smashes all that. But even then, I think at the core, if you look at what your business is about, your purpose, your key idea, what your market and customers are about, your constituents, right? What you do as a service and products, but also to your community, that is probably stable, and for a while, and that even in these deep reactions, they are basically audience that you want to talk to in the parameter of the big strategy, and then you want to be flexible within, and then it's a time frame when you need to revisit all the time. But if you would need to change your strategy every month, you really wonder what has happened in the debates, political arena beforehand when you thought about that. And so it's, a framework that is, kind of stable, but within you can move. But if you move too much all the time over the years, I wonder what your board will say as well.
Yes. And do you know from research, are there any like typical mistakes organization makes in this sense or another sense when we are like in what you could call more turbulent times? Or do you have any like advice here that research points to?
Yeah, so I think, one step back to our strategy debate, right? I think it's again, the deeper that's embedded in your organization, understood, people are seeing your strategy in every corner of what they do and why that's connected and why are we doing this and how we actually get to our strategic aims, short, mid, long term. That gives you, the starting point, you're probably less at risk in turbulence and difficult times because you are on a very strong path already, right?
Yes.
So number one. Number two is, are you prepared for change? You don't want to. So we work with organizations, in particular at executive committee level, that permanently prepare for events without changing, right? But you think about what could happen. What's the scenario? And so they have themselves to help themselves and basically win time. Scenarios, anticipation, put themselves in the competitors' minds, today probably into global leaders' minds in some form, so that you win that little bit extra time because you've done some homework. And the third is, do we put in resilience in our system and adaptability, right? As real hard systems and measures, right? Do we have a bit of slack? Are people trained in adverse situations? Do we know how to change our processes or think about that? This type of adaptation while the overall framework stays. And you want to invest into that before it's happening, so that you have more response time. The alternative, if it's not a shock from outside, is we often think about organizations needing to respond. And I'm a huge fan to say, why are we not the organization that the others need to respond to? So if we are innovative, if we are the pace setter, whether we like one of the most important e-car brands in the world or not, but they've created a market, right? They haven't waited.
Yes.
And all the others came later. So there's something as well. Some of the outside shocks, that's difficult. But in your market, why are we not the ones and the others are sweating and following?
Yeah. That's of course a great question, I guess, to take into the C-suite as well. I like this thing about investing before you stand up in the situation. Make sure you've done your scenario planning. You can do that, not to react right now, but then you are much faster if you need to do things.
I mean, one fascinating piece. You didn't use the word crisis, right? Sometimes people look at crisis, and one of the things that we've figured in our research, but also with working with organizations, you want to ask yourself, when does a crisis actually manifest? And so when do we see the crisis and when do we act upon? And these are two completely different things in organizations. We see crisis long time, but who wants to be the messenger, right? And so what's our culture to say we don't want to be in permanent panic mode, but if we see dark clouds, are we allowed to share? Are we allowed to discuss? So that, again, we win the time, or we let that ripen, everyone looks in a different direction, yes. And yes, we know this technology is coming, yes, we know the competitor is coming, but why would I be the one, right, to share that? So again, you win. I think that's a cultural question where you want to look at whether we allow that to happen so that we are faster than others.
Yes, yeah, great. Perhaps we should have KPIs on the resilience part and how prepared we are as an organization. That would be good to have the measure and not just on lacking indicators that we sometimes.
I think that would be a good idea. Infrastructure is nowadays really looking at that from a system perspective, right? How resilient is infrastructure? Why don't we say from a KPI question, how resilient is our organization for ABCD?
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. We're starting to get to an end here. Perhaps. Do you have one final advice to leaders if we are to build more energy into the organization? Something that perhaps look more at this, or what could it be?
Yeah, I think, like I said earlier, think about how you mobilize, right? Really mobilize alignment, deeply embedded shared direction, right? The second tricky bit is once you're energized. And you want to think, how do you sustain shared engagement over time? We often think about, let's run, and then, you can't run a marathon at sprint level. And so how do we find pauses? How do we navigate ups and downs in our annual performance calendar? And so that people have a fair chance and acknowledge that there are downward phases because you need to basically recover for the next sprint. And so there's two things. Mobilizing is great, but the sustaining and how do we create an ongoing healthy performance and healthy engagement of our people is a key question that comes later, and it's at times overlooked, but some organizations are very clever in sustaining the human force in the organization.
Great. Thank you so much, Bernd, for all your input, and thank you so much for taking your time and being here. And thanks to all of you for listening to this podcast. Stay curious out there. Leadership requires a passion for lifelong learning.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.